Welcome back to our live coverage of the United Nations Climate Talks here in Durban, South Africa. We're going to bring you an interview now with Hans Rogner of the International Atomic Energy Association. And as you might have guessed from that introduction, we're going to be talking about nuclear power. So Hans, I would like to ask you first, what's the interest of your organisation here at the Climate Talks?
Well, we would like simply to present nuclear as a technology that can help mitigate climate change. It is a low carbon technology where most of the emissions are associated with the construction of the nuclear facilities and infrastructure, and during the enrichment process, depending on the fuel or electricity mix that goes in it, that are the main emissions that we have. Compared with, let's say, fossils, they are 2 orders of magnitude lower, and they are at par with the best renewables.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, this is a very contentious issue at these talks, and it's a very contentious issue within the environmental movement. Some people are saying that we need to move to nuclear. Others are very cautious about it. Why do you think people are so worried about nuclear energy?
Well, there are, first of all, 2 reasons. Its origin has been the military, the bomb. That's something that people sort of sticks in their mind, and they can't get rid of that. Then, of course, radiation is something they don't understand. You can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't smell it, you can't touch it, and so on. It's also that many people have their pet projects, renewables. Now, nuclear is a very bulky technology. You come in with 1,000 or 1,600 megawatts, and they are afraid that it would crowd out their wind or other renewable technologies.
Mm-hmm. And people talk a lot about the costs of nuclear, the fact that they have huge subsidies, especially in Europe. What would you say to people who are worried about the costs?
Well, the subsidies in Europe have basically disappeared and are now in the research field. Subsidies are a policy instrument and therefore have a place. I mean, look at renewables in Europe, all the feed-in tariffs and so on are subsidies. So that's a policy tool, and I believe that in Europe any new build will not really have any benefits from subsidies.
Mm-hmm. And with regards to the longer term costs of nuclear power, there's obviously a legacy of nuclear that you don't have with wind and solar. You have radioactive waste that is expensive and complicated to deal with. Why is that not a concern, or why should that not be a concern for our viewers, do you feel?
Well, I would not say it shouldn't be a concern. It has to be properly managed, and that means a good regulatory system that takes care of the safety aspects, that it's being shielded off the biosphere, and of course that the necessary escrow funds for the waste disposal, for the decommissioning, are in place when needed. And the problem often is that these funds have been created but then diverted for other uses.
And your message is relatively clear. Your message is relatively clear. It's clean. It's not too expensive. It's the legacy, as long as you deal with it appropriately, could be okay. Why is it then that in a recent poll, just last month, a poll conducted across 23 countries, only 22% of people said they thought that nuclear power was a good idea and they wanted more nuclear power. Only 22% of people thought it was safe. Why is your industry failing so badly with its messaging?
Well, first of all, an accident like Fukushima certainly has an impact, and I think it's quite natural that people take a step back and say, "Oh, maybe we really don't want it. We should do something else." But if I then look, what are the alternatives? What are our objectives in terms of, let's say, energy security, mitigating climate change, and so on? Then I see that this will also come back again. That's the first natural response to a disaster like Fukushima.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that there is a significant risk here? Because when a windmill gets blown over in the ocean, the loudest thing you hear is a splash. When solar panels are trashed by a hurricane, it's not at the end of the world. When a hurricane rushes through a nuclear plant, you're talking potential catastrophe. Is this a real significant issue that people should be worried about?
It is an issue that needs to be addressed by technology, and a Generation 3 Plus plant at the location of Fukushima would probably have survived it. It is also a learning effect. With each new cycle you improve safety, you improve security aspects, which since 9/11 of course are also a concern, and so on. there is no technology without risks and wastes. And you really have to simply put them all at par on a level playing field and compare them. And then you will come, for some, well, the risks exceeds the benefits, then it won't do it. Others determine that the benefits exceed the risks, then you go ahead with nuclear power.
And we've seen a report come out in recent weeks saying that globally we've got a matter of years to turn around our energy industry unless we want to lock ourselves into dangerous use of fossil fuels. What's the build time for a nuclear power plant? How quickly can it come online, and is it soon enough to actually make a real difference?
Nuclear is not a quick fix solution. You have lead times for 10, 15, even 20 years. Particularly for countries that have no nuclear power. They have to develop an infrastructure, and I mean a soft infrastructure in terms of nuclear law, in terms of an independent regulator, in terms of education. All these take time. You cannot do this overnight. The construction, can take any time from 4 to 10 years. We have this Finnish example, which is not necessarily a good sales argument, but then again the Chinese or the Koreans have built on time and on budget. It is also a learning curve. If you don't do it, like let's say in Europe we have not built much, then it takes longer. It's the first of a kind type of experience. You have to relearn what you forgot.
And so with that in mind, given this is not a quick fix solution and we've got a climate crisis that requires a quick solution, it's an urgent climate crisis, what role is nuclear going to have?
Well, nuclear is a longer term solution. As I say, if you decide to go nuclear today, probably your first electrons will not flow to the grid until 2020 or beyond, depending which kind of infrastructure is available already. But I think you cannot exclude the technology, because even after 2017, I guess you were referring to the World Energy Outlook of the IEA, which points to 2017 as the lock-in date. But you will not be able to do it with any other technology either, really. We have to do an all-out effort, including efficiency improvement, end use, maybe even lifestyle changes. But if I look at the fast-growing developing countries that have not been really emitting that much yet, I'm not talking about China and India, but look at the Vietnams, the Thailands, Indonesia and so on. There it is an option to make a bit of a difference, yes.
And so what's the outlook for the nuclear industry following Fukushima and given its incredibly low levels of support internationally? What's the outlook in the next decade? Well,
what we have seen is that the use of nuclear power has been contested in Germany. No other country has sort of started phasing out their existing. There are contested issues on new build, like in Italy, Switzerland, Japan, of course, and so on. But by and large, the feedback we have received from our member states, and we have 151 or 2, is yes, we take a step back. We reevaluate our options. And then they come to recognize that the drivers that was sort of behind this renaissance in interest over the last 4 or 5 years have not gone away. It's still energy demand, climate change, energy security, volatile fossil prices, and so on. And we do our annual projection, a high and a low, every year. This year we did it after Fukushima. And what we saw from feedback is we will see a shift by about 5 to 8 years. And for 2030, I have the numbers, we are about 7 to 8% lower than what we had last year.
Germany's an interesting case study. You've said that they've decided to phase out nuclear power. What have been the consequences of that decision?
The consequences have been that electricity prices have gone up. Now people argue how much and what the reason is and so on. You will see increased carbon emissions because the bulk of nuclear power that's being phased out will be replaced by fossils. So I have a little bit of a problem to see how things tally up. One side you want to have stringent emission controls. Then you take one of the lowest emitters out of the service. Somehow not will be an all-out effort to see how they will do this.
Okay. And do you have any predictions in the German instance?
Not really. I mean, being a German, I mean, if we say we go this way, then we are probably doing it. You know?
Okay. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in following years then.
Well, I mean, for the next little while, I guess that is the course they will steer. And I mean, as we have seen in history, if the framework conditions change, then also policy may change. But that is a long way. I'll probably be long retired.
Mm-hmm. And now we've got a bit of background context. How is nuclear power situated within these talks? Is it referenced within a text? What's the positioning here? Why are you here?
Okay, first of all, the talks here have not really addressed nuclear for many, many years. I guess the last time it was really on was when we had the CDM debate in The Hague and then in Bonn about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. It is so controversial that the negotiators just don't want to touch it. So they said that has to be resolved at the highest level, that means at minister or heads of government or state. And that's where we stand. So I don't see there is any movement right now. Mm-hmm. There are so many other issues where I think we need to resolve those before they could revisit the nuclear issue.
And so what's the interest of your organization here?
Well, we want simply to say, do not exclude a powerful, in terms of mitigation potential, technology and limit your flexibilities. Let member states decide or parties decide if they want it, yes, but don't sort of impose on other countries what they should be doing.
Holger, thank you very much for joining us. It's been an interesting insight, and we'll make sure we bring you some different perspectives on this issue over the course of the next 2 weeks, so do tune in, but that's a great way to start our discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.